about what is it? Sort of 4 or 5 weeks later, the allocation balances out, right, and it starts to operate in a fairly predictable way. So if anybody's following along, you see the next diagram with a curve. You can see that after was it like April 4th, I believe, maybe April 8th, the allocation starts being smooth. Like all the arms are growing at the same rate, which means that they're kind of uniform, right? That the algorithm, whatever was going on, the allocation now has been restored, and it continues being sort of regular. So we're left with this strange sort of 4-ish weeks at the beginning of the high dose ivermectin arm, where we had more patients allocated, just even arithmetically. We had more patients allocated to the high-dose ivermectin arm, and then we don't have equivalently more patients being allocated to the placebo arm that is supposed to be at the same period of time. So in their paper that they published, the authors swear up and down that all the patients that we're looking at are after March 23rd, both for placebo and for treatment. This is as clear as it gets. But when we see there are normal arms and there are various publications for fluvoxamine, for metformin, and we assemble the results, there's at the end of the sort of the ivermectin trial in August, we have 679 patients for ivermectin. Okay, that's close to what they had said, even though there was some ambiguity, but let's grant that. But we have, I believe, 604 patients on the placebo arm that could be compared against ivermectin. Yet what they report is 679 placebo patients. So there's this weird 75, the ghosts of Belo Horizonte, the city where most of the centers were. 75 patients, we don't know where they came from. Now, there is one theory one hypothesis that fits everything we know, which is that remember the 2-week gap we were talking about before the start of the high dose ivermectin? Well, that gap has exactly 75 patients extra in the placebo arm, right?
Yep. So fill that in. What does that imply?
So the hypothesis, just to spell it out, is that those 75 patients were used. So the placebo arm was taken over a longer period of time than the ivermectin arm, right? It had 2 extra weeks at the beginning. Now, those 2 extra weeks at the beginning, when we look at the case fatality rate from the area, had a lower case fatality rate. So it was right before the kind of the burst of the gamma wave. Gamma wave, that sounds like, anyway, gamma variant wave. There was no radioactive effects that I've been able to discern anyway. Maybe I should look into it. So we have a lower case mortality, actually, in that previous period right before. There's another problem, and this problem I just can't. Wait.
I don't want you to go on to your next problem yet, because again, this is too subtle.
Okay, let's make it more.
So, if the hypothesis is correct that they used the placebo-recruited patients from an earlier period than the ivermectin, the high-dose ivermectin patients to whom they were being compared, then that is a failure of control, right? So we had a failure of randomization, and now we have a failure of control. Mm-hmm. And the reason that that's a failure of control, and in this case, there are lots of ways this could go, but because the weeks in question were less severe COVID weeks, it makes the placebo group look healthier. So if you took the high-dose ivermectin patients from a week when things were particularly bad, they would tend to be sicker. And if you take the placebo patients to whom they are being compared from a relatively less sick week, then that will tend to make the drug look less effective, whatever its actual effect is. Right. So that, if it is true, is the second utterly fatal failure here. Yep. Now, I want to point to a third failure. The obvious thing is you say, well, here's a hypothesis about where these patients came from. You researchers have published this paper. If those placebo controls were not from this period where it seems likely they came from, then you researchers have the most incentive of anybody to simply reveal what the discrepancy in the data is about. And they should be eager to do it. And to the extent that they are not being forthcoming about showing their data, that is odd, right? Yep. You have an anomaly. It's not unusual that a paper is ambiguous in terms of what it presents, but the right remedy, the normal scientific remedy, is for a request to be made to see the data and for that data to be provided so that it's clear that there's nothing being hidden.
Right. Right. And in fact, as per the fluvoxamine paper that was published in, I believe, October, in the Lancet, if you look at the data sharing statement, they say, upon publication of this manuscript, we will make the data available through some procedure that, I have more questions with. But the long story short is that didn't happen. There is no access to the data as of October. They said the same in the publication now in the New England Journal of Medicine. Still not the case. They now, in an email, the principal investigator said, we're busy because we're submitting a EUA for this other drug that succeeded, and we'll do it, basically. but that will go to some body that you have to submit a research proposal, and that body in coordination with the investigators will review and approve. This was not what was promised originally. They said upon request, upon termination. Right? When we're done, ask for the data. If you look legit, we'll give you the data. That's not what's happening. And actually, none of those two things are happening. It's not upon termination, right? So we're still waiting. And the process is starting to acquire hoops to jump through, which, look, we are in a situation.
Look, I hate to use this metaphor. Maybe it's unfair, although maybe it isn't. You say, well, this that you've published does not add up as it is. Can I see the data? And they say, do you have a warrant? Right? Yep. I mean, the question is, why are they not providing the data? They should be eager to do it, because the fact is, it would become obvious if the mistakes are trivial. It would become obvious if there are mistakes that are not trivial, but they are made in good faith. That's not fatal. But what is fatal is things that cannot be reconciled in what they published, and a refusal to clarify what generated those anomalies.
Yeah, and it should be noted, right, that this is happening in a period of time and in a specific sort of molecule that's being investigated that has attracted a lot of scrutiny. And to the degree that the studies are being scrutinized and bad science is being found out, I absolutely have no objection personally. We all learned a lot about what to trust and what not to trust. We've gotten more skeptical as a result. I subscribe to that program. I do not subscribe to the claims that were made on the basis of those findings that the entire research of that field is now a fraud or these kinds of things, because it actually, when I looked at the baseline, if I get 100 randomized trials in anything, how many randomized trials do I expect to be garbage, right? Junk, sloppy, fraud, whatever. About 20%.
Which is shocking until you realize,
it's crazy.
Well, it's crazy if you imagine, which most people do, that the purpose of science is to figure out what's taking place. But what people don't understand is that there is a substantial and hidden landscape of perverse incentives, right? Academics are competing with each other for grant money. They're competing for jobs, and the ability to publish something somewhere is part of the key to getting ahead. So why are 20% of the studies, dead on arrival in terms of the quality of the methods or what was actually done? Well, it has a lot to do with the fact that you get rewarded for publishing something. You don't necessarily get rewarded for having done the job well, which slows it down and means you publish fewer things. In fact, you get punished for it. So anyway, we did find out that there's a shocking level of garbage in science. But you're right. The fact that even a fraudulent trial doesn't say anything about the trials that weren't fraudulent. These are independent pieces of evidence. And this is part of why some of us have pointed to meta-analysis as a better standard, because unlike the randomized controlled trial, it's not easily gamed. And at the point that you find out the study in your meta-analysis isn't valid, either because it was methodologically flawed or fraudulent, you can just simply click it off and see how it affects the analysis.
Yep.
Right? It's a robust method. Anyway, there are many concerns here, but I would say if I was an editor who had published this, and I watched the authors refuse to clarify significant issues that were raised by critics who are looking at the paper and asking obvious questions, that would set off alarm bells.
Yep. So remember we talked about these 75 ghost patients. So there's another difference between these patients. And this is, I find it quite humorous for reasons I'll mention later. But it appears that the protocol that changed on March 21st, right, made a change from the original protocol that was in force in early January when the previous batch of patients, including the 75, were recruited. The original protocol cited SARS-CoV-2 vaccination as an enhancement factor of your risk for whatever reason, which means that you are, if you have other basic criteria met, this is kind of the big one, you get included in the trial. So if you were vaccinated in that period of early January until early March, if you were vaccinated and you showed up at one of the trial centers in that period of time, that was a reason to add you to the trial. Maybe they wanted data for that. I can even come up with actually reasonable explanation, which is that maybe in Brazil at that time, they were only vaccinating the high-risk patients. So they're like, this is kind of a proxy for high risk. I don't know. But they would add you to the trial. After March 21st, vaccination switched from being an inclusion reason to an exclusion reason. So if you were vaccinated, they say, sorry, we can't add you to our trial. This is like a pretty big, so some of the previous patients are vaccinated. All of the later patients are not vaccinated.
So if the issue of placebos and treatments for ivermectin being disjunct in time is what it appears to be, right? Then the change in protocol from an inclusion criterion to an exclusion criterion is absolutely fatal. Now, I know that the authors have claimed it's just a typo. Am I correct that
No, it's not the authors. It's not the authors. Absolutely. I no. This is somebody. Somebody on the internet that claimed it was
somebody on the internet.
Some person on the internet who is ever present when a certain molecule is discussed favorably.
Oh, well, okay. But
that's the best critique we've seen. That I mean, it's so implausible basically that what he ended up saying is that it's just so crazy that it could only be a typo.
It could only be a typo.
No reason to believe it actually happened.
Which, of course, makes, given that it's not the author who has said it, we shouldn't dwell here. But it makes no sense as a typo. First of all, it's hard to specify what the typo would be in any case. But so what we've got then is an incredibly important anomaly. Now, I will point out, you could make an argument for vaccination as an exclusion criterion. You could make an argument for it as an inclusion criterion. What is absolutely vital is that it does not change in a way that separates the placebo group from the treatment group, right? And we appear to have the possibility here, and you can, for those trying to follow how this would have worked, to the extent that the vaccines have a positive impact on one's trajectory with COVID. If you have a placebo group in which people are included because they are vaccinated, then they will do better than they might if they had been unvaccinated, and that will tend to make the treatment look less effective. So another thing that people should be tracking is, okay, it's a complex trial. There are lots of nuances. The people running the trial are discovering errors that they make in real time and trying to correct them. But when all of the errors go in one direction, a direction that would tend to make this particular treatment look ineffective, even if it was effective, that raises questions in and of itself. Right? It's possible to have errors that go in both directions. You would expect them to be equally likely. But when all of the errors go in one direction, that again sets or should send up red flags.